हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू एनसीईआरटी ऑडियो बुक। आज हम क्लास 12th का लेसन फर्स्ट देखेंगे, रिप्रोडक्शन इन ऑर्गेनिजम्स। Each and every organism can live only for a certain period of time. The period from birth to the natural death of an organism represent its lifespan. Lifespan of a few organisms are given in figure 1.1. Several other organisms are drawn for which you should find out their lifespans and write in the spaces provided. Examine the lifespan of organism represented in figure 1.1. Isn't it both interesting and intriguing to the note that it may be as short as a few days or as long as a few thousands years? Between these two extremes are the lifespan of the most other living organisms. You may note that lifespans of organisms are not necessarily correlated with their sizes. The sizes of crow and parrot are not very different, yet their lifespans show a wide difference. Similarly, a mango tree has a much shorter lifespan as compared to peepal tree. Whatever be the lifespan, death of every individual organism is a certainty. That is, no individual is immortal except single celled organisms. Why do we say there is no natural death in single celled organism? Given this reality, they have you ever wondered how vast number of plant and animal species have existed on earth for several thousands of years? There must be some processes in living organisms that ensure this continuity. Yes, we are talking about reproduction, something that we take for granted. Reproduction is defined as a biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones, offspring similar to itself. The offspring grow, mature, and in turn produce new offspring. Thus, there is a cycle of birth, growth, and death. Reproduction enables the continuity of the species generation after generation. You will study later in chapter 5 principles of inheritance and variations, how genetic variations is created and inherited during reproduction. There is a large diversity in the biological world, and each organism has evolved its own mechanism to multiply and produce offspring. The organism's habitat, its internal physiology, and several other factors are collectively responsible for how it reproduces, based on whether there is the participation of one organism or two in the processes of reproduction. It is of two types. When offspring is produced by a single parent with or without the involvement of gamete formation, the reproduction is asexual. When two parent opposite sex participate in the reproductive processes and also involve fusion of male and female gametes, it is called sexual reproduction. 1.1 Asexual reproduction. In this method, a single individual parent is capable of producing offspring. As a result, the offspring that are produced are not only identical to one another but are also exact copies of their parents. Are these offsprings likely to be genetically identical or different? The term clone is used to describe such morphological and genetically similar individuals. Let us see how widespread asexual reproduction is among different groups of organisms. Asexual reproduction is common among single-celled organisms and in plants and animals with relatively simple organization. In Protista and Monarians, the organisms of their parent cell divides into two to give rise to new individuals. Thus, in these organisms, cell division is itself a mode of reproduction. Many single-celled organisms reproduce by binary fission, where a cell divides into two halves and each rapidly grow into an adult, amoeba paramecium. In yeast, the division is unequal and small buds are produced that remains attached initially to the parent cell, which eventually get separated and mature into new yeast organisms cells. Members of the kingdom fungi and simple plants such as algae reproduce through spatial asexual reproductive structure. The most common of these structures are zoospore that usually are microscopic motile structures. Other common asexual reproductive structures are conidia, penicillium, birds, hydra, and gamule sponges. You have learned about vegetative reproduction in plants in class 11th. What do you think? Is vegetative reproduction also a type of asexual reproduction? Why do you say so? Is the term clone applicable to the offspring formed by the vegetative reproductions? While in animals and other simple organisms, the term asexual is used unambiguously. In plants, the term vegetative reproduction is frequently used. In plants, the units of vegetative propagation such as runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, bulb are all capable of giving rise to new offspring. These structures are called vegetative propagules. Obviously, since the formation of these structures does not involve two parents, the process involved is asexual. You must have heard about the storage of the water bodies or about the territor of Bengal. This is nothing but the aquatic plant water hijack, which is one of the most invasive weeds found growing wherever there is standing water. It drains oxygen from the water, which leads to the death of fishes. You will learn more about it in chapter 13 and 14. You may find it interesting to know that this plant was introduced in India because of its beautiful flowers and shapes of leaves, since it can be propagated vegetatively as a phenomenal rate and spread all over the water body in the short period of time. It is very difficult to get rid of them. Are you aware how plants like potatoes, sugarcane, banana, ginger, dahlia and are cultivated? Have you seen small plants emerging from the buds called eyes of the potato tuber from the rhizome of banana and ginger? When you carefully try to determine the site of the origin of the new plantlets in the plants listed above, you will notice that they invariably rise from the nodes present in the modified stems of these plants. When the nodes come in contact with damp soil or water, they produce roots and new plants. Similarly, adventitious buds rise from the notches present at margins of leaf bryophyllum. This ability is fully exploited by gardeners and farmers for commercial propagation of such plants. It is interesting to note that asexual reproduction is a common method of reproduction in organisms that have relatively simple organizations like algae and fungi, and that they shift to sexual methods of reproduction just before the onset of adverse condition. Find out how sexual reproduction enables this organism to survive during unfavorable conditions. Why is the sexual reproduction favored under such conditions? Asexual as well as sexual mode of reproductions are exhibited by the higher plants. On the other hand, only sexual mode of reproduction is present in most of the animals.
1.2 Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves formation of the male and female gametes either by the same individuals or by different individuals of opposite sex. These gametes fuse to form a zygote which develops to form the new organisms. It is an elaborate, complex, and slow process as compared to asexual reproduction. Because of the fusion of male and female gametes, sexual reproduction results in offspring that are not identical to the parents or amongst themselves. A study of the diverse organisms, plants, animals, and fungi show that though they differ so greatly in external morphology, internal structure, and physiology, when it comes to sexual mode of reproduction, surprisingly, they share the similar pattern. Let us first discuss what features are common to these diverse organisms. All organisms have to reach a certain stage of growth and maturity in their life. Before they can reproduce sexually, that period of growth is called the juvenile phase. It is known as the vegetative phase in plants. This phase is of variable duration in different organisms. The end of the juvenile vegetative phase, which makes the bringing of the reproductive phase, can be seen easily in the higher plants when they come to flower. How long does it take for a marigold, rice, wheat, coconut, mango plants to come to flower? In some plants where flowering occurs more than once, what would you call the interflowering period, juvenile or mature? Observe a few trees in your area. Do they flower during the same month of year after year? Why do you think the availability of the fruits like mango, apple, jackfruit, etc. is seasonal? Are there some plants that flower throughout the year and some others that show seasonal flowering? Plants, the annual and biennial types, show clear-cut vegetative reproductions and senescent phases, but in the perennial species, it's just very difficult to clearly define these phases. A few plants exhibit unusual flowering phenomenon, some of them, such as the bamboo special, flower only once in their lifetime, generally after 50 to 100 years, produce a large number of fruit and die. Another plant, Strobolanthes kunthiana, Nila kuranji, flowers once in 12 years. As many of you would know, this plant flowered during September to October 2006. Its mass flowering transformed large tract of the hilly areas in Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu into blue stretches and attracted a large number of tourists. In animal, the juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes. Prior to active reproductive behavior, the reproductive phase is also is variable duration in the different organisms. Can you list the changes seen in human beings that are indicative for reproductive maturity? Among animals, for example birds, do they lay eggs all through the year, or is it a seasonal phenomenon? What about the other animals like frog and lizards? You will notice that birds living in nature lay egg only seasonally. However, birds in captivity, as in a poultry farms, can be made to lay eggs throughout the year. In this case, laying egg is not related to reproduction, but it is the commercial exploitations for human welfare. The females of the placental mammals exhibit cyclical changes in the activities of ovaries and accessory ducts as well as the hormones during the reproductive phase. In non-primates mammals like a cow, sheep, rat, deer, dogs, tigers, etc., such cyclic changes during reproductions are called estrous cycle, where in a primates like monkey, apes and human it is called menstrual cycle. Many mammals, especially those living in the natural wild conditions, exhibit such a cycle only during the favorable seasons in their reproductive phase and are therefore called seasonal breeders. Many other mammals are reproductively active throughout their reproductive phase, and hence they are called continuous breeder. That we all grow old if we live long enough is something that we recognize, but what is meant by growing old? The end of the reproductive phase can be considered as one of the parameters of the sensation or old age. There are concomitant changes in the body like slowing the metabolism, etc. During this last phase of the lifespan, old age ultimately leads to death. In both plants and animals, hormones are responsible for the transition between the three phases. Interaction between hormones and certain environmental factors regulate the reproductive processes and associated behavioral expressions of organisms. Event in sexual reproductions. After attainment of maturity, all sexually reproductive organisms exhibit events and processes that have a remarkable fundamental similarity, even though a structure associated with sexual reproductions are indeed very different. The events of the sexual reproduction, through elaborate and complex, follow a regular sequence. Sexual reproduction is characterized by the fusion or fertilization of the male and female gametes, the formation of zygote and embryogenesis. For convenience, these sequential events may be grouped into three distinct stages, namely pre-fertilization, fertilization, and the post-fertilization events. 1.2.1 Pre-fertilization event. These includes all the events of the sexual reproduction prior to the fusions of the gametes. The two main pre-fertilization events are gametogenesis and gamete transfer. The 1.2.1 Gametogenesis. As you are already aware, gametogenesis refers to the process of formations of two types of the gametes, male and female. Gametes are haploid cells. In some algae, the two gametes are so similar in appearance that it is not possible to categorize them into male and female gametes. They are hence called homogametous or isogametous. However, in majority of the sexually reproducing organisms, the gametes produces are two morphologically distinct types that we called heterogametes. In such an organism, the male and gamete is called the anthrozoids or sperm, and the female gamete is called egg or ovum. Sexuality in organisms. Sexual reproduction in organisms generally involved a fusion of gametes from two different individuals, but this is not always true. From your recollections, for example, studied in class 11th, can you identify cases where self-fertilization is observed? Of course, citing such examples in plants is easy. Plants may have both male and female reproductive structure in the same plant, bisexual, or on the different plants, unisexual. In several fungi and plants, terms such as the homothallic or monoecious are used to denote the bisexual condition, and heterothallic and dioecious are the term as used to describe unisexual condition. In flowering plants, the unisexual male flower is staminate, that is bearing stamen, while the female is pistillate or bearing pistil. In some flowering plants, both male and female flowers may be present on the same individuals, monoecious, or on the separate individuals, dioecious. Some examples of monoecious plants are the cucurbids and coconuts, and the dioecious plant are papaya and date plant. Name of the type of the gametes that are formed in staminate and pistillate flowers. But what about animals? Are individuals of all species either male and female, unisexual, or they are species which possess both the reproductive organs or bisexual. You probably can make a list of several unisexual animal species: earthworm, sponge, tapeworm, and leech. A typical example of bisexual animals that possesses both male and female reproductive organs are hermaphrodites. Cockroaches is the example of unisexual species. Cell division during the gamete formation. Gametes in all heterogametic species are of two types, namely male and female. Gametes are haploid through the parent plant body from which they arise may be either haploid or diploid. A haploid parent produces gamete by mitotic division. Does this mean that meiotic never occurs in organisms that are haploid? Carefully examine the flow charts of the life cycles of algae that you have studied in class 11th to get the suitable answer. Several organisms belonging to Monera, fungi, algae, and brachyphytes have haploid plant body, but in organisms belonging to pteridophytes, gymnosperm, and angiosperm, and most of the animals, including human beings, are the parental body is diploid. It is obvious that meiosis, a reduction division, has to occur if a diploid body has to produce haploid gametes. In diploid organisms, specialized cells are called meiocytes. Gamete mother cells undergo meiosis. At the end of meiosis, only one set of the chromosomes gets incorporated into each gamete. Carefully study table 1.1 and fill the diploid and haploid chromosome number of the organisms. Is there any relationships in the number of chromosomes of meiocytes and gametes? 1.2 gamete transfer. After their formation, male and female gametes must be physically brought together to facilitate fusion fertilization. Have you ever wondered how the gametes meet? In a majority of organisms, male gamete is motile and the female gamete is stationary. Exceptions are a few fungi and algae in which both types of the gametes are motile. There is a need for the medium through which the male gametes move in several simple plants like algae, brachyphytes, and pteridophytes. Water is the medium through which the gamete transfer takes place. A large number of the male gametes, however, fail to reach the female gametes. To compensate this loss of male gametes during the transport, the number of the male gametes produced is several thousand times the number of the female gamete produced. In seed plants, pollen grains are the carriers of the male gametes and ovule have an egg. Pollen grains produced in anthers therefore have to be transferred to the stigma before it can be lead to fertilization. In bisexual self-fertilizing plant, peas, transfer of pollen grains to the stigma is relatively easy as anthers to stigma are located close to each other. Pollen grains soon after they are shed come in contact with the stigma, but in cross-pollinating plants, including the dioecious plants, a specialized event called pollination facilitated transfers of pollen grains to the stigma. Pollen grains germinate on the stigma and the pollen tubes carrying the male gametes reach the ovule and discharge the male gametes near to the egg. In dioecious animals, since male and female gametes are formed in different individuals, the organisms must evolve a special mechanism for gamete transfer. Successful transfer and coming together of gametes is essential for the most critical events in sexual reproduction, fertilization. The most vital event of sexual reproduction is perhaps the fusion of gametes. This process, called syngamy, result in the formation of diploid zygote. The term fertilization is also often used for this process. The terms syngamy and fertilizations are frequently used through interchangeability. What would happen if syngamy does not occur? However, it has to be mentioned here that in some organisms like rotifers, honeybees, and even some lizards and birds, turkey, the female gamete undergo development to form new organism without fertilization. This phenomenon is called parthenogenesis. Where does syngamy occurs? In most aquatic organisms, such as majority of the algae and fishes as well as amphibians, syngamy occurs in the external medium, water, that is outside the body of the organism. This type of the gametic fusion is called the external fertilization. Organisms exhibiting external fertilization show great synchrony between the sexes and they release a large number of the gametes into the surrounding medium water. In order to enhance the changes of syngamy, this happens in the bony fishes and frogs where a large number of the offspring are produced. In major disadvantages is that the offsprings are extremely vulnerable to predators, threatening their survival up to the adulthood. In many terrestrial organisms belonging to fungi, higher animals such as reptiles, birds, mammals, and in the majority of the plants, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperm and angiosperm, syngamy occur inside. Post-fertilization events. Events in sexual reproduction after the formation of zygote are called post-fertilization events. 3.1 The zygote. Formation of the diploid zygote is the universal in all sexually reproducing organisms. In organisms with external fertilization, zygote is formed in external medium, usually water, whereas those exhibiting internal fertilization, zygote is formed inside the body of the organisms. Further development of the zygote depends on the type of the life cycle of organisms and the environment it is exposed to. In organisms belonging to fungi and algae, zygote develops a thick wall that is resistant to desiccations and damages. It undergoes a period of rest before germination. In organisms with haploidtic life cycle, as you have read in class 11th, zygote divides by meiosis to form haploid spores that grow into haploid individuals. Consult your class 11th book and find out what kind of the development takes place in the zygote in organisms with diplontic and haplodiplontic life cycle. Zygote is the vital link that ensure continuity of species between the organisms of one generation and the next. Every sexually reproducing organism including human being life as a single cell zygote. Embryogenesis. Embryogenesis refers to the process of development of embryo from the zygote. During embryogenesis, zygote undergoes cell division, mitosis, and cell differentiation. While cell divisions increasing the number of the cell in the developing embryo, cell differentiations help group of the cells to undergo certain modifications to form specialized tissue and organs to form an organism. You have studied about the process of cell division and differentiation in the previous class. Animals are characterized into oviparous and viviparous based on whether the development of the zygote takes place outside the body of the female parent or inside, that is whether they lay fertilized, unfertilized egg or give birth to the young ones. In oviparous animals like reptiles and birds, the fertilized egg covered the hard calcareous shell are laid in the safe place in the environment. After a period of the incubation, young ones hatch out. On the other hand, in viviparous animals, majority of mammals including human beings, the zygote develops into the young one inside the body of the female organism. After attaining a certain stage of growth, the young ones are delivered out of the body of the female organisms. Because of proper embryonic care and protection, the chances of survival of young ones is greater in viviparous organisms. In flowering plants, the zygote is formed inside the ovule. After fertilization, the sepal, petals, and stamens of the flowers wither all fall off. Can you name a plant in which the sepals remain attached? The pistils, however, remains attached to the plant. The zygote develops into the embryo and the ovules develop into the seed. The ovary develops into the fruit, which develops a thick wall of the pericarp that is protective in function. After dispersal, seed germination under favorable conditions to produce new plant. Here the first lesson, reproduction in organism, is completed. Thank you, viewers.